this can be real cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, can I have your attention, please? I just want to remind everyone that the discussion about this winter meeting doesn't exactly happen in this room, but it also happens online. So I invite you all, when tweeting, to use our hashtag, USCMWinter, when posting tweets. It's a great way to see what others are saying and to bring the conversation beyond the Capitol Hilton Hotel. Also, we are asking mayors to sit down with our film crew for a few minutes during this meeting to talk about what happens when we invest in cities, the impact of congressional budget cuts, and the measures you have taken to help create jobs. We want to share them later, your answers, via Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and as we lead up into the President's State of the Union and the release of the budget. The filming for this initiative will be going on during our meeting hours in the Ohio room, starting today, going through Friday. So I urge you to go by and to be filmed, and we'll put you on our website as we go forward. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the sponsors of this year's winter meeting: the American Beverage Association, the American for the Arts, HDR, Interface Americas, Merge Healthcare, Starbucks Coffee Company, and this year's title sponsor, Siemens. It's my great pleasure to introduce Eric Spiegel, the CEO and President of Siemens Corporation and CEO of the U.S. region. Siemens had more than $22 billion in annual U.S. sales in 2011, employs over 60,000 American employees throughout the 50 states and Puerto Rico. Siemens' relationship with the conference extends far beyond our annual winter meetings, for which they have been great title sponsors. They're also sponsoring a series of discussions we will be having related to exports, ports, workforce innovation, and energy and efficiency, and will partner with us to continue the success of sustainable cities across this United States. Please join me in welcoming back Eric Spiegel.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, mayors, for having me here this afternoon. As you can probably guess, this is a very important event for Siemens. This conference is about an issue that we've all been thinking about a lot for the last several years. How do we create jobs, and how do we create a lasting and vibrant economic recovery? It's also worth recognizing that recent numbers suggest that the U.S. economy may be coming back a little. I think last month we added about 200,000 jobs, so I think we have a long way to go, but I'm optimistic, more optimistic than I was a few months ago. I think it's also, we should note that the strength of our economy, a lot of the recovery, I think, is due to the manufacturing sector, which is what I'd like to talk a little bit about today. In fact, manufacturing employment grew by about 136,000 jobs last year, which amazingly is the first time that we've had jobs growth in manufacturing in this country since 1997. Okay? I'm a strong believer that if America is going to have a recovery, that it's going to be led by manufacturing. And I believe just as strongly that we have the opportunity to bring this to reality. So let me tell you a little bit about why I believe that. There's been a sense over the last decade or so that the decline of American manufacturing was an inevitability that couldn't be avoided. People assumed that because labor was cheaper elsewhere, and because no company would build something that cost more when they could build it for less, that manufacturing in the U.S. was doomed. And to some extent, over the past decade, they've been right. But that conclusion assumes several things that have turned out to be wrong. First, that cheaper wages would always lead to cheaper production costs. Secondly, that many of the products of the future, like many of the products of the past, would essentially be commodities. And that could be built with equal quality and equal technology just about anywhere in the world. And third, that the productivity of the workers in low-cost countries would be comparable to workers in the U.S. These assumptions were mostly right when it came to manufacturing things like textiles and furniture and shoes. Lower technology products that don't require a lot of upfront innovation or a lot of back-end precision. But what we are seeing is that high technology products can't be built just anywhere, nor can they be built necessarily at a lower cost. High-tech products need to be built where they can be improved and innovated. And the higher a product's value, the less wages really matter. If you're manufacturing blue jeans, your highest cost probably is your wages. But if you're manufacturing gas turbines, as we do, your wage rates are a lot less significant to your income statement. And when you consider American workers are three times more productive than Chinese workers, well, the gap gets even less. What that means for America is that high-end, capital-intensive manufacturing is the way of the future. The revival of the manufacturing sector will depend on our willingness, all of us, to invest in those technologies and also to continue to drive productivity. Increasingly, the companies that are manufacturing around the U.S. and in your cities are doing just that. But there's another important component for us to keep in mind. If you can't improve the product here, you're not going to be successful. Sometimes products get to the point where you can't make the next generation much better than the current generation. For example, you can try to add an internet connection to an alarm clock, or you can put a remote control on a trash can, but at some point you've got it about as good as it's ever going to be. When that happens, the product becomes a commodity, and that means many of our competitors from around the world can now build them just like you can, but probably a lot cheaper. And that's really been game over for manufacturing in the U.S. I raise this point because it illustrates what American manufacturing has to do going forward if we want to improve our competitive position. We need to build technologies that constantly improve. We need to compete with the rest of the world by leveraging the strength of our innovation so that the next iteration of what we're building can be much better than the current version. That's why there's been such a strong push for companies like ours to build things like turbines and trains, medical equipment, clean coal, and smart grid. Because with the right army of innovators, each of these products will have a strong opportunities for growth here in the U.S. For example, we just expanded our plant in Charlotte, where we build the world's most advanced, most efficient gas turbine. We built it here because we know that the next generation of that plant will be much better than our current one, and that's why we marry our manufacturing and R&D employees at the plant. Just last week, the Export-Import Bank announced that it was providing a loan for customers in Saudi Arabia so that we could export 10 of these large gas turbines to the kingdom. That's $1 billion deal for us, but more importantly, it creates 700 jobs in Charlotte and will allow us to achieve our vision of adding ultimately 1,100 jobs there. And these aren't low-paying, low-skilled jobs. The average job in that Charlotte plant is about $70,000 per year. More importantly, it's going to create jobs along the whole supply chain in logistics, customer service, engineering, et cetera. And ultimately, we'll add about 2,000 additional jobs to the local economy in Charlotte. And I hope that makes Mayor Fox very happy. But the truth is, because I want to wrap up here, the truth is that this innovation isn't just happening here, it's happening all around the world. Offshore wind and high-speed rail in Europe, biofuels in Brazil, battery technology in Asia. But too many advances are happening elsewhere. We need to focus on how we can bring more here. And if we keep continuing to play catch-up, there will be a point when we aren't a leader in innovation anymore. And when that happens, we really don't have any competitive position to be leveraged. And I think that's what's really happened in the last decade. If you saw the article in the National Science Board today, over the last decade, we've lost over 25% of our high technology manufacturing jobs in this country, and we need to bring those back. But this conversation isn't just about us versus the rest of the world. It's about what we need to do with our cities like you. And there's a lot of factors that go into that decision. But the most important ones for us are skilled labor and having a productive workforce. Also thinking about higher education in the cities and how we improve that, a modern infrastructure, but also building a link to R&D and manufacturing. And so cities that have high-tech manufacturing and R&D components are very attractive to us. So we're eager to partner with you all around these issues. We think we figured out how to help cities make this work, and we've got jobs available and new technologies that we're trying to bring to this country. I just want to leave you with one final thought. There's another reason why global companies like ours want to make things work in the United States. It's not just because we believe in the innovative strength of America, but it's also because, as a global company, we know that the rest of the world wants to do business here. We see the power of stamping Made in America on our products. The rest of the world trusts the U.S. as a business partner, and they trust the quality of the products. So I'm convinced that we're on the precipice of a new dawn of manufacturing here in the U.S. Companies want to be here, we want to be here, and there's good reasons to be here. Thank you very much.
I see that we have our host, Mayor Gray, here. Let's give him a big hand. And thank you, Eric, for that presentation. I want to say to you that the mayors all across the nation are focused on the issue of infrastructure and investment, and that's why we're here to tell the Congress that they need to do their job and they need to focus on our jobs. I'd like to now introduce the District of Columbia Mayor, Vincent Gray, to welcome us to his city. Right from the start of his term, Mayor Gray has been an active member of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Mayor, thank you for your support and your leadership. Please come on up.
Mayor, good to see you, sir. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I am delighted to be here. Thank you, Mayor Villaraigosa, for your leadership. It has been a wonderful experience for me for this past year to be a part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and I look forward to continuing to work with you, to work with all of our colleagues out here as we grapple with some of these very daunting issues that we face. But first of all, let me welcome you to the District of Columbia. We're delighted to have you here. I probably should have said welcome to the state of New Columbia, masquerading as a city, because we hope that the day comes when we are the 51st state in the nation. But if that were to happen in the foreseeable future, which is unlikely, I'd still be a member of the U.S. Conference of Mayors because I enjoy coming here and being a part of what's going on here. I think one of the greatest values, frankly, to me, of the membership here is the collegiality, the collaboration, the cooperation among the members. And the informal relationships that evolve from these meetings have been invaluable to me, as I have been able to work with people who have common problems, who have common issues, and together work towards solutions to some of those daunting and complex problems that we face. We certainly all face the challenges of public education, the undereducation, the miseducation of our children, and the results that emanate from that, and some of the other problems that we face in our cities. The continued shrinkage here in the District of Columbia, at least, of affordable housing, the resulting increase, especially for us, in young homeless families. We have 100 more families this January in shelter than we did last January, and we expect it to only worsen as we get further into the winter, and facing the question of how we create housing and opportunity for young families who may be at the margins of income. And certainly, we all grapple with crime, although we are delighted here in the District of Columbia. We just had a banner year. We had fewer murders in 2011 than we've had in the last 48 years, since 1963, and we hope to be able to continue in that direction. And of course, the major issue for so many of us is unemployment. I was delighted to be a part of a panel yesterday. I appreciate Mayor Villaraigosa, your leadership in focusing on infrastructure, focusing on unemployment. We had a rich and robust discussion yesterday about tactics that we are using, strategies that we are using to address unemployment. We still have, even though it's coming down, we have an unemployment rate in the city of 10.6%, which belies the reality that in some sectors of the city we have unemployment as high as 20 to 25%, which is absolutely overwhelming. I would hope that out of yesterday's rich discussion that we could take some of those ideas, put them into a publication, put them on the internet, put them online, and allow us to be able to access that kind of information, because I think that is one among the many, one of the greatest benefits that we have of being a part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So I want to welcome you all here. I'm delighted to have you in our great city. We hope that you will go all across the city while you're here. And I want to ask you one other thing as we all face these economic pressures, and that is, while you're here, spend absolutely every dime that you have in your pocket. It doesn't just have to be cash. We'll take credit cards, we'll take checks, and for this group, we'll even take an IOU. Thank you all very much and enjoy your week.
That's the way you do it, baby. That's the way you do it. That's my kind of mayor. Spend, spend, spend. I never miss an opportunity to welcome people to LA and say, shop till you drop, buy till you, I won't say that. But thank you, and you always so gracious to welcome us. Mayors, welcome to our nation's capital. But before I begin, I'd like to thank Tom Cochran and his staff for their hard work in organizing this year's meeting. I love Tommy, and I mean that not just because I'm standing behind a podium. I love his passion, and I can tell you that one of the delights of being president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors is working so closely with Tom. Not only is he one of the hardest working people in Washington, he's one of the most passionate. And to have worked here as long as you have, and still wake up in the morning and want to fight on behalf of America's cities is just an inspiration. Give him a big hand. We are very fortunate to have him. Now, mayors, back home, I know your inboxes are full. Your phones are ringing off the hook. So I, as much as anyone, feel compelled to thank you for investing the time to come to Washington this week. Now, today the mayors release our Metro Economies in 2012 report. Hope all of you have a copy. They should be on your tables. The findings, well, they're pretty stark and clear. While D.C. dithers, our metro areas are driving America's recovery. And mayors, Washington needs a wake-up call. You know, there's been a lot of talk about the 99%, and there should be. Washington needed a wake-up call. For too long, issues of social justice and economic equality have been issues that we have raised again and again, and the Congress has sat on the political sidelines. In fact, just a few moments ago when Nancy Pelosi was here, she mentioned our Poverty Work and Opportunity Task Force. Ever since Katrina, mayors have been coming together and say, you got to address this growing gap. Washington needed to wake up and focus on the middle-class families who face piles of past due notices and wonder how they're going to get by. Washington needed to wake up and focus on all those Americans who face the prospect of an American dream that grows more and more elusive every day. And now, as our report shows, it's time for Washington to wake up to the 90%. That's right. 90% of the nation's economic output is produced in our cities. From the downtowns to the suburbs, in our factories, in our offices, in our ports, in our industrial parks, Over 85% of the nation's jobs are generated in our metro economies. And the report said something else. If cities are leading this recovery, every one of us knows it's a fragile one. We can't let it slip from our grasp. As the findings show, we had a 1.3% job growth across the country last year. Now, that's not nearly enough to put our people back to work. This year, we expect just 2% growth in GDP, and that's if things fall into place in the way that they could. But there are a whole lot of factors that could interrupt that. What's going on in Europe? What's going on in the Congress today? And so despite the neglect and inaction in Washington, local leaders have been in the trenches getting things done. While Congress has played politics on the debt limit, it was cities like Akron, Ohio, where Mayor Don Pasquale convinced the German auto supplier, Reuschling, to say, "Made in the USA." And now, more than 100 new jobs for skilled machine workers are available to Akron residents. And during this football season, while Congress punted on infrastructure jobs, it was in places like Davenport, Iowa, where they created a model downtown jobs program that matches public resources with private dollars to put more people to work. It's a story being replicated from Bellingham to Boston. In my own city, we're making a $4 billion investment at our airport, generating about 40,000 jobs, more than $1 billion investment at our port to compete with the Panama Canal, generating another 20,000 jobs. There's a lot we can do with a partnership, but we need the Congress to do its job. Now, Congress needs to stop starving our economic engine, our metropolitan areas, and immediately make the common sense investments in transportation, infrastructure, and workforce development. We heard from Elizabeth Kautz, our former president, just a few moments ago, a Republican mayor, talking about the need for workforce development. Workforce development, cutting payroll taxes, investing in our roads and our highways. These are things that we've been doing on a bipartisan basis for more than 50 years. We can put people to work by building the foundation that this country needs to compete around the world. You know, earlier today, some of the California mayors were meeting with Secretary LaHood on the issue of high-speed rail. And one of the things I said was, we're debating whether or not we should build high-speed rail in the United States of America 50 years after the Japanese built the Shinkansen, moving more than 2 billion people in that great country. And by the way, not one fatality as a result of an accident. The fact of the matter is, for all of those who say it costs too much, we're going to have to build it one day. Everybody's making investments in high-speed rail. It's going to cost a lot more 20 years from now. But if Congress gives us the tool, we, the nation's mayors, will get it done. We'll put more of our people back to work and get America's economy humming again. That will be our message this week. It's simple. Congress needs to do its job to help us put people back to work. The economic recovery is too slow, and it's a direct result of the inaction of this Congress in 2011. Now, just imagine for a moment if they had taken our advice last June. A small fraction of the $126 billion we're pouring into the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Imagine if we had put 1 million Americans back to work last year, rebuilding our roads, bridges, and our rail here at home, with a proposal that was separate and apart from the surface transportation bill, but would have invested in infrastructure. Now, I can tell you this, we wouldn't be standing here with 340 of our cities fighting to recover from the Great Recession. 80 of our metro areas wouldn't need at least another 5 long years to dig out of this hole. Now, the road to recovery will be longer if Congress keeps on putting up roadblocks. Now, as mayors, we know that the economic downturn has forced government to take and make tough budget decisions. Mayor Nutter has had to cut his workforce. I've cut a fourth of the city's general fund workforce. We've had to almost double from 6% to 11% the amount that people contribute to their pensions for their retiree health. We've had to balance our budget, not by passing the buck, but by making the tough decisions. And unfortunately, our local governments are a lot like Rodney Dangerfield. We get no respect. Always at the bottom of the food chain and the wrong end of the stick. When they cut in D.C., when they cut in our state capitals, it's cities like ours that feel the pain. If only it went the other way. If only we could balance our budgets by slashing waste in our state capitals and here in D.C. But we don't have that luxury. We face down the hard budget decisions with drastic drops in revenue. We've struggled to balance our budgets while keeping cops on the beat and picking up the trash on our streets. I didn't hear a loud enough applause for the fact that Mayor Gray and Washington, D.C. have driven down crime and homicides to 1963 levels. I mean, that is amazing. That is amazing after cut after cut after cut. In L.A., some of you know I used to shine shoes at 5 years old. That year was 1958. We haven't been safer than we are today on a per capita basis since 1952, a year before I was born. We need to get this Congress to invest in cop grants. We've had to lay off hardworking employees. We've consolidated departments and closed down others. And while we've been working, we've had to watch the world's best paid debating society in the U.S. Congress. We've had to watch as they use our time, and by the way, our tax dollars, to pursue a campaign strategy of inaction and obstruction designed to defeat President Obama. Now, the American people need an economic strategy right now, not a political one. In the chamber of the House of Representatives, right behind the Speaker's chair, there's a quote by Daniel Webster, one of our country's great legislators and thinkers. It's an inspiring call to action that shows great confidence in America's capacity to do big things. You heard Ariana talking about that capacity a few minutes ago. And he said, "Let us develop the resources of our land, call forth its powers, build up its institutions, promote all its great interests, and see whether we, also in our day and our generation, may not perform something worthy to be remembered." But these days, another quote might be more appropriate. As I watched the Congress this summer and fall, I don't think any of us thought of Daniel Webster. I thought of another great American thinker. I thought of Yogi Berra. With each failure on jobs, it was just like Yogi said, deja vu all over again. What we've seen is a Congress that keeps on making the same mistakes. If we gave the 112th Congress a midterm report card, the grade would be clear. Congress would get an F for failure. Now, I can't say it more clearly, and neither can any of you. Congress has flunked, they've failed, and we, the American people and our cities, can't afford this failure. We can't afford this inaction. We can't afford a Congress where the representatives with the least experience and the most rigid views routinely block good bills and believe that brinksmanship is the only way to negotiate. Some of you know that I was an assembly member, majority whip, majority leader, Speaker of the California State Assembly. I remember when we used to value in our legislators, in our leaders, compromise. I remember when we used to value those statespeople, those people that were bigger than themselves and that were willing to focus on solutions. I remember when we worked across the aisle. In fact, one of the first things I did, in fact, the first thing I did as Speaker of the California State Assembly, with Democrats sitting on one side of the aisle and Republicans on the other, is I sat them together. I gave the Republicans, who were the minority at the time, the ability to name every vice chair for the first time in modern history. I gave them a more proportionality of resources, and we worked together. When I ended, I said, after 6 years, I said, you know, I've learned a lot in the 6 years I've been here. I learned there are Democrats I work with every day I wouldn't invite to my home to dinner. There are Republicans who I never vote with who I would. I learned that people are people. And we need the Congress to start understanding that. We can't afford a Congress where again and again the public interest is sacrificed in the name of brain-dead partisanship. Congress has to be a place where all of our representatives understand that obstruction isn't governance. It's an abdication of responsibility. In fact, it's political malpractice. You know, we've all been watching in horror as this story unfolds of the sinking and sunk Concordia. Imagine a captain abandoning the ship with untold number of people, his passengers, who he's duty-bound to represent and care for. Imagine jumping into that lifeboat before the women and children. Well, that's what these people are doing with the economy. We're trying to right the ship, and they don't care that it's sinking before their very eyes. Now, Congress has to be a place where our representatives appreciate that compromise isn't betrayal. It's the best way for political partisans to work together. Mayor Nutter likes to say, and nobody says it more eloquently, he likes to say when people bump into him on a street or in a neighborhood, nobody asks him about the deficit. Again and again and again, their question is, Mayor Nutter, when are you going to get me a job? I want to get to work. Well, that's the question we have for the Congress. It's got to be a place where Congress takes Webster's words seriously and develops the resources of our land and builds up our institutions. Last June, we made an offer to the country and our leaders here in Washington. We pledged that as mayors, we were willing to lead. We dealt with the devastating effects of the greatest recession in our lifetime. We understood the problems, and we were ready with solutions. I want to remind you, and we all have a copy somewhere, of the common sense jobs agenda that we put together. Now, you all remember what its origins were. We went to Democratic and Republican think tanks, and we said, find me initiatives that over the last 50 years have been supported by Democrats and Republicans alike. Initiatives like infrastructure investment, initiatives like workforce training that the U.S. Chamber and the AFL-CIO all support. We said, find us initiatives that we can join hands together and present to the Congress to put people back to work. Well, lo and behold, virtually none of those proposals have found any support in the House. But I'll tell you, that's just not good enough. You know, if the first half of the 112th session was a failure, those of us who studied know that you might get a fail or an F on the midterm, and if you work hard and you apply yourself, who knows, you might get a passing grade. And that's why we're here. A lot of people have asked, and they said, well, Mayor, they asked us at the press conference, well, with the abject failure of this Congress, why would you come in the middle of a political season and ask them to do more? And the answer is because that's what the people of our cities want. We pledged that we'd offer practical ideas that would work across the country. But in June, as I said, we also said we can't succeed alone. We need a Congress that was willing to act on jobs. We needed a Congress that was willing to give us support to leverage our local investments with federal funds and put even more people back to work. In June, we were hopeful, the country was hopeful, that Congress would never be foolhardy enough to take the nation to the brink of default. But it was, and it did. This summer and fall, we all hoped that the Super Committee would adopt a new game plan and come to common sense budget agreement that balanced cuts with new revenues. Unfortunately, the Super Committee ended in a super collapse. And now in 2013, we face automatic and mandatory cuts over a 9-year period that will total $1.2 trillion. Cuts that will devastate vital, cuts that will further hamper our economic recovery. Now, most of all, mayors hoped that Congress would act decisively on the jobs package sent to the Hill by President Obama, but it failed here too. Congress took the chance to provide a long-term extension of the payroll tax cut. Now, these are people that ran on a campaign of tax cuts and never saw a tax cut they didn't like until the president proposed it. Now, we know that that failure has left millions of people who depend on unemployment insurance wondering how soon their benefits will expire. It missed the opportunity to keep thousands of qualified teachers in the classrooms. And it's done nothing to help those who have dropped out of the labor market get the training they need to get back on their feet and qualify for the jobs of the future. All for the sake of political advantage and partisan ideology. Well, I think I speak for all of you when I say it's time to put the country before our party and the people before all else. I know what the pundits say. They say it's an election year and that nothing gets done in an election year. But with 12% unemployment in my hometown, we need to throw out the usual playbook. We need to get things done. And as mayors, we've held up our side of the bargain. And the offer we made in June still stands. It's now time for the Congress to act. As I said, if the Congress flunked the midterm, it could still get a passing grade. When Congress returns to session, it must make a down payment on America's economic future. It must pass a comprehensive long-term jobs bill. We don't need another extension. We need an extension of leadership. We need a bill. We need a bill that puts more money in workers' pockets with a sustained payroll tax cut. A jobs bill that gives businesses, large and small, incentives to hire new workers. A jobs bill that looks to the future and helps American workers get the training and skills they need to compete for the global economy's good-paying jobs. When Congress returns to work, it must stop the threat to the Community Development Block Grant Program. A few minutes ago, you heard Mayor Nutter talk about the foreclosure crisis that's blighted countless neighborhoods, littering them with boarded-up homes. Since 1974, CDBG has been one of the most effective programs for addressing blight like this and revitalizing our communities. But over the last 2 years, Congress has slashed this funding by $1 billion. We can't have the budget axe hanging over our heads. CDBG is a crucial source of funding for cities. Mayor Nutter mentioned earlier today, there's a 3-to-1 dividend on the investment. Mayor Smith, a Republican, said when answering the question about don't we need to make cuts, he said there are smart cuts and there are dumb cuts. And I think you couldn't have said it any better. Cuts that hurt investments that produce dividends like housing and economic development are the wrong cuts. It helps working people improve their job skills. It's time to stop the cuts. It's time to restore full funding to CDBG. I mentioned Congress has cut critical public safety programs. For the last 2 years, cops hiring grants have taken a 44% cut. The burn justice assistance grants have been slashed by 1/3. Over the last year, firefighter assistance programs have been trimmed by 16%. Now, in 2012, we need to restore public safety funding. Now, Congress has to get the message. Homeland Security begins with hometown security. For the last 7 years, the U.S. Conference of Mayors has promoted consumer financial protection and education. We saw how we got into this economic mess. We got in this mess with derivatives. We got in this mess with predatory lending. And now we need a real ally in the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Since its inception, some in Congress have tried to stop the Bureau in its tracks. The time for games are over. We call on the Congress to let the Bureau do its work. The American economy works best when everyone plays by the same rules and consumers have real protection from predatory business practices. It's good for business and it's good for America. And it's the fair and right thing to do. When our representatives get back to their desks, they need to pass the Surface Transportation Bill. We need a long-term transportation funding plan, not short-term stopgaps. The Boxer-Imhoff bill will create millions of good-paying jobs across the country in places like Milford, Ohio, Blairsville, Pennsylvania, and Elizabethtown, Kentucky. It will launch America Fast Forward, which, as you know, 120 of you have signed on to the idea that at a time of high deficits and debt, when we're putting up our own money, they ought to loan us the money to accelerate our programs and put people back to work. 1 million people will get back to work with America Fast Forward alone. So these are the kinds of things that Congress can and should do. It will make critical improvements to our aging transportation infrastructure. Businesses in our city will get their goods to market faster, and our residents will spend less time gritting their teeth in gridlock and spending more time on the things that matter. Mayors, this is the time. Our cities provide the power to the American economy. The Metro Economies report makes that absolutely clear. Our constituents produce the goods and the services that the country and the world depend on. The companies in our industrial parks and our manufacturing centers are creating America's jobs. But for all the hard work going on across the country to get our economy moving again, we haven't seen the same from our leaders and representatives here in D.C. In this political season, we will be heard. We need to demand a vision for our metropolitan areas. We need to ensure their commitment to our cities. And above all, we need action, not talk. We can't wait another year. We can't accept business as usual, and above all, we cannot have another season of abject failure. This is the time. This is our time. The future's in your hands. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now, I think it's important, and we all thought that starting out with Ariana, who certainly is a visionary and someone, a patriot who understands the need for America to reclaim the values and the priorities that made it great. And then Speaker Pelosi, who, as I said, I don't think there's a better friend in the Congress. Again and again and again, she's there. My State of the Cities report, and now we have an opportunity to have a very special closing speaker this afternoon. Joel Benenson is one of the hardest working pollsters in national politics. I know for a fact that Joel dreams about crosstabs. He was the lead pollster and senior strategist for President Barack Obama during the 2008 election, and he'll continue in that role in this cycle. He's been a pollster and a strategist for U.S. senators, governors, and, yes, mayors from around the country. At all of our recent meetings, I've asked that national pollsters help us better understand the priorities of the American public, how a bipartisan agenda on job creation is registering with voters. And I'm very pleased that Joel is here today with his polling data to help us with that discussion. So please join me in welcoming Joel Benenson.
Thank you, Mayor Villaraigosa. Thank you to the Conference of Mayors and to Mayor Villaraigosa and all of you for inviting me today. I don't know if the mayor knows this or not when he quoted Yogi Berra, but one of the charitable ventures that I engage in back home is I'm on the board of directors of the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center. Yogi lives in Montclair, New Jersey, which is the town where I live in. He's lived there since he played for the Yankees. And there are two remarkable things about all the great things that we know that Yogi has said over the years. One is that they're all true. There's actually a book on the Zen of Yogi, but even the one that says when you come to a fork in the road, take it, is actually true. Yogi's house was at the end of a cul-de-sac around a fork, and whenever he gave people directions to go to his house, he would say, when you come to the fork in the road, take it, and whichever way you went, you got to his house. And the other one that's one of my favorites is that I'll share with you is that former Governor Mario Cuomo of New York, who is from Queens, New York, where I grew up on the streets of a blue-collar neighborhood. I grew up in Laurelton. He grew up not far from there in Queens Village. But he was at an event with Yogi once, and he asked him, he said, Yogi, did you really say all those things that people say you said? And Yogi said, well, if I didn't, I should have. So if there's anything that I don't get to, I probably should have, and we've reserved some time for questions and answers. I'd also like to just announce very quickly here that Benenson Strategy Group, I think of it always as a small firm. I started it with just 3 people, and for those of you who are mayors of the city of Denver, of Mayor Gray of Washington, D.C., and in New York, we're an employer in those cities. We've grown to all of those, and as of November, the chairman of this conference, Mayor Villaraigosa, is the mayor of a city where we now employ people. We have an office in Los Angeles. So what I thought I would do today is, I know you're going to talk a lot of politics tomorrow with my good friend Anita Dunn and Steve Schmidt from the Republican side, and talk about the election specifically. But what I thought I'd do, and I think it links up well with what Mayor Villaraigosa laid out today, is what are some of the underlying attitudes that really shape the mindset of American voters and are going to shape the dialogue and the conversation that you're going to have throughout 2012. Now, I will touch on politics, I promise you, and I certainly, coming from Queens and New York City, I will take any questions and certainly any challenging questions. Queens is a place where we like to say that a day without an argument is a lost opportunity, so we will certainly get to that. We've got a lot of technology here, so hopefully it'll work right. There we go. Look, I think it's important that we start with understanding the context that we're in. The American people never believed that this was an ordinary recession. If you go back to data that was taken in December of 2008, and all the data I'm going to present today is from various public sources, not the internal stuff that I do for my clients nationally or locally. But if you go back, you had 4 in 10 people in 2008 who told Gallup that they didn't even think that we would start to recover from this recession during President Obama's first term. If you take a look at the 16% at the bottom of that pie, that orange slice, that adds in another 16% who thought it would take just 3 years even to get the recovery started. Now, the point of this isn't to say that they've got very long patience, that when you encounter them on the streets, they're not very anxious about the moment that we're in. But it's that they understood that this crisis wasn't created overnight and that we weren't going to get out of it overnight. I've done work with middle-class voters since 2005, all across the country, people I call the vast middle income, middle American values, some from the heartland, to Latino voters in Secaucus, New Jersey, or suburban voters in Phoenix, and you heard the same story. People then believed that the economy was changing as far back as 2005, that the rules they saw their parents grew up with and that they grew up in the workplace were out of sync, that something was out of balance. So when this finally hits in 2008, the notion that they're not believing in quick fixes and the same war was very palpable to them. And they also, at the same time, believe and understand that the economy that we're in is changing. You know, to Eric Spiegel's point, who I think on his notes on manufacturing are critically important, America is still the leading or second leading manufacturer in the world, depending on how you look at it. And the notion of high-skilled manufacturing growing and being the wave of the future here is something that's palpable and true. But the economy does look very different to people today. And when you ask a question about whether they think when the economy finally recovers, Allstate does a series of polls called the Heartland. Do you think that the economy will be very different from what it was before the recession, or will it look the same? And by an overwhelming majority, just about 3 to 1, people believe that this economy is going to be different after we get out of this recession. And this goes beyond just technological changes. They really do think that the basic rules have shifted on them, and they don't ask for much. But what they want when you talk to working Americans is just a sense of reciprocity. That if I'm a loyal employee, if I've done my job well, that all I want back from you is the same loyalty I've given. If I've gotten outstanding performance evaluations in my job, don't give me a 9-cent an hour raise at the end while your business is still doing well. Take a look out for my future as well as yours. They're very clear about where they see the factors that contributed to this downturn are. Allstate back in October of 2011 asked Americans, what is the number one reason that caused the downturn, the number one contributing factor? They then followed that up with a question, the same list, what's the number 2 factor as well? The most striking piece of data here is that 51% saw the risky investments of the big investment firms and the big banks as the number one reason. Their second most cited reason was that American companies are not investing in America. American voters today, and you folks probably encounter this when you talk to your constituents day in and day out, they're very aware of the fact that there have been significant profits accumulated over the last few years by American businesses that are sitting on the sidelines and not being reinvested, and that could strengthen the American workforce, that could strengthen the American economy. So it goes beyond just outsourcing. They're very aware of what the potential there for that is as well. They then go on to talk about the 37% say, if you look at the middle bar, the policies of the Bush administration. Families taking out debt and credit card, 35%. And then lastly, on the far right on the list, 26% who talk about the economic policies of President Obama. You have to understand they're not immune to the talk of the deficit. They're not unaware of it. They're very aware, in fact, that we had a surplus in 2000 that became a deficit by the time we got to the end of 2008. But they have been, since this time when I started really focusing on middle class and working class voters throughout America in 2005, they've been very bothered by their own personal debt. They see it as limiting their potential to advance. Americans don't blame others. They don't look to point fingers. They take responsibility for things on their own. And people back in focus groups that we talked to in 2005 said things that, like, if I don't pay off my credit card bills, when my paycheck comes in, I've got to pay somebody else before I can pay me and my family. And when you look at the behavioral shifts that are occurring now, with people saying, I'm going to pay down credit card debt instead of buying, these deep-rooted sentiments and attitudes are really coming to play in a way that have a big impact on us. So it does ladder up somewhat to the deficit discussion that we have. They do think it's something that we have to address along the way. But they also see the lingering unemployment rates at 8%, which no one is happy about. President Obama announced when the job numbers came out last month, we are making progress, but we still have work to do. But the American people, and this is from a Bloomberg study back in 2011, they link the persistent unemployment to several structural problems in the economy. They're linking it to U.S. companies investing in jobs overseas. They understand that the job market has changed, and some of the jobs that used to give people a path from poverty into the working class, from the working class into the middle class may not exist, and there's going to have to be some investments made in education and training to get us out of that. And they also believe that the financial crisis will take time. Perhaps some of the most jarring numbers to think about and the toll that this takes on Americans are that some of the fundamentals, some of the rock-solid fundamentals that people believed in have shifted for the first time. So when I tell you that, oh, they see the rules have changed. In fact, many of them say, it's not just that the rules have changed, I don't even recognize the rules. Some of this data is really quite striking. On the left side of this, for the first time since Gallup tracked this question on whether people think that today's youth will have a better life than their parents, a majority say it's unlikely. That's the first time that's happened. I'm showing you the results from 2011. It first went into the majority a little bit earlier. And on the right, you know, I grew up, my mother was a single mom in the 50s, probably before the term was ever coined. I grew up in a working class family. As I said, there were 3 kids. I was the youngest of 3. You know, we were told growing up everybody had to graduate from high school. My mother's dream, probably like many of you in this college, was for, many of you in this room, was for all their children to go to college. And when you look at the right, at the Heartland poll, that's just from last July, and they asked a question that said, which comes closer to your view, that a college education is a ticket to the middle class today? You see the number on the left side of the pie, that green slice, it's a minority of the sample. It's 40% of the people. And on the right side, people are saying that a college education today is an economic burden. It's a burden that's often too expensive and requires taking on too much debt. You know, if we're going to create the high-tech jobs that Eric Spiegel was talking about a minute ago, that are also outlined in a great piece in The Atlantic this month on the nature of our high-tech labor force and why there are high-tech jobs that Eric said are going to have to be done in the United States. We are going to have to change this attitude again. We're going to have to keep investing money in colleges, not cutting student loan programs, adding to it. We're going to have to do a better job with education and invest not just to prevent layoffs, but to address some of the issues that Mayor Villaraigosa talked about, which means not cut funding for our K through 12 schools, which, by the way, Americans now understand that our K through 12, although they will tell you K through 12 schools are no longer the best in the world. They know that our university system is. But there's no reason, they say, why our K through 12 schools shouldn't be the best in the world as well. And because of a lot of this, one of the things that changes is their belief that in this economy, this new economy, that just their own hard work gets ahead. Look, I always talk about the fact that America is the most entrepreneurial culture in the world, and I don't mean that just in the sense that we all want to be small business people. Although I actually was one before I had this business. I was a beer distributor in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. But Americans, this was our strength. We always believed this, that all I had to do was work hard. There was a simple set of rules, did my job well, showed up, progressed a little bit, that I could get ahead in this world. And that number has declined. It was 73% in September of 2000. By March 2006, it's at 64%, and now it's at 58%. There's a sense here that, as I said, they just want to be rewarded. They want to be recognized for the work they do. And their doubts about how this economy is changing and how it will affect them is creating some anxiousness here. Perhaps the biggest dynamic that we're seeing are attitudes on risk and how they're shifting with the American people. You know, we're a pretty daring people. A lot of us come here from different countries. A lot of our grandparents did, our parents did. But today, the American people see an economy that presents more risks than opportunities to their standard of living. So when you look at the data on the left and people are asked, compared to your parents when they were your age, do you believe today's economy presents you with more opportunities to improve your standard of living, the same amount of opportunities, or fewer? If you look at the big chunk of that pink pie there, 42% say more opportunities. Parallel question on the pie on the right side of this slide. In the same survey from 2009, compared to your parents, do you think today's economy poses more risks that endanger your standard of living as your parents did when they were our age? And there's a 20-point gap there. 64% of people think today's economy poses more risks for their standard of living than opportunities at a parallel point in their parents' lives. Now, that may be hard for us to understand. We may just say it's all the macroeconomic issues, and there is some of that. But they also understand, when you dig more deeply and you talk to them in one-on-one interviews or in ethnographic research or focus groups, one of the things that you learn is that some of the badges of working in middle-class success the mortgage on your home, your cars that you were able to buy with financing, admittedly, going to college, are now points of burden for you. They create some economic anxiety, as that slide about college showed before. Now you're worried, can I handle that debt? There was a point here when people thought that those who controlled the risk had tamed risk. That if I refinanced my home, the folks at the bank had figured it out, that I could afford it. If I wanted to go get that second car and get a new one instead of a used one, the folks who were giving me the car loan had figured it out and they knew I could afford it. Today, what shifted, and this is across the consumer work we do as well as seeing it in this political environment, people are changing the way they view risk. They are not entirely risk averse, but they have become more wary of risk. They feel better about the choices they make when they've weighed risk very carefully, and they take the less risky choice. So, for example, if you look at new car purchases, which the rescue of Detroit has been fabulous. We've got jobs saved. We've got all three automakers profitable for the first time in a decade. But today, new cars that are being bought, the average age of the car that's being turned in is 10 years as opposed to 7, which it used to be. More people are willing to buy used cars before new cars. So they're not totally risk averse, but they are wary of it. And it manifests itself in some interesting ways. If you look at the top arrow, and the data on the top of this chart, and you ask people, which would you prefer? Opportunities to change employers or professions, or long-term employment with a single employer? By 2 to 1 now, Americans are saying long-term employment with a single employer. Now, I don't want to sound too retro here, but that's a very 50s, 60s kind of approach. You know, the days of the company town are long gone. The days of getting a job coming out of college and being with a company for life. Kids coming out of college for the last 10 or 15 years haven't anticipated that, and they haven't lived that way. And in fact, what's really interesting is the little bar beneath that says among millennials, even 55%, 18 to 34-year-olds, 55% say they would prefer a single long-term job. Now, what you have to understand about that age group is that the statistics show that for them, on average, by the time they're 35 years old, they're already going to have 5 to 7 jobs. It's a very different world than a lot of us grew up in. So they are weighing risk. They're looking for things that provide an element of security. They prefer a guaranteed lower return on their investments, even if it meant giving up less control. That shapes their attitudes going forward as well. I think something that, and I'm sure we'll get to this, I know it's a bipartisan group, so I would be happy to take questions on this subject, but it is a sign of turbulence that people are identifying. And they are saying that today, and this is a question that's asked by the Pew Research Center in California, which comes closer to your view? Does Wall Street help the economy more than it hurts it, or hurt it more than it helps it? And by 51 to 36, Americans to say Wall Street hurts it, our economy more than it helps it. And what's notable on this slide, if you look at the bars on the right, that breaks it out by Democrats, independents, and Republicans. And this isn't just Democrats saying this. Among independents in America, 54% to 37% say Wall Street's hurting our economy more than it's helping it. And I mentioned the turbulence. Don't forget that folks think and believe that we've lived through 2 bubbles in the last 10 years. We lived through an internet bubble that led to 1 recession. We've lived through a housing bubble, many of which affects many people who are directly invested in that housing market. An important distinction here as you think about this, and this shapes a lot of the debate that's going on, this was an institution that was extremely admired 11 years ago, Wall Street, big banks. And this is for many of you who are mayors in cities, you know that community banks are still very revered, and they are. And when you ask a question and rate the favorability of big banks, Wall Street, community banks are off the charts. Small businesses are off the charts. Large banks in Wall Street, the trust in that institution has also gone down. And from a perspective of their personal lives, on the left side, a question that was asked by Pew as well, do you think there's too much power in the hands of a few rich people or large corporations in the United States, or do you not think so? By 77 to 19, And again, that's that amber bar, and across the ideological spectrum, even a majority of Republicans actually say yes to that. Now, I don't think yes-no questions are always great questions. Very easy to say yes or no. But on the right side is a similar question, but it goes at it a little differently. Does the economy in this country unfairly favor the wealthy, or is it generally fair to most Americans? And here by 61 to 36, not quite 2 to 1, but a very clear majority, people believe that the deck has been stacked against them, that they're not the favored group. The New York Times, I don't know how many of you read this, a story about a week or so ago, that economists had done a study that shows that we have a lot less mobility in this country than we have believed. In fact, we have a lot less mobility from income quartiles from one level to another. And again, when you look at Democrats and independents on the right side, very strong majority saying that they do not, they believe that this current economy favors the wealthy more than America. Look, the significance of that is that fairness and balance and the things that people are talking about when they express these attitudes are fundamental American values. And those are the things that they believe have gotten out of whack. And it manifests itself in one of the hot button issues. Mayor Villaraigosa referred to, tax cuts and the payroll tax cut before. The thing that bothers most Americans about taxes today, they don't believe the system's fair. In fact, if you look at the left by 55 to 43, they say that. But when you ask them the follow-up question of what bothers them the most about taxes in America today, the thing that bothers them the most is the notion that there are some wealthy people who don't pay their fair share in taxes, 57%. The amount that they pay themselves is 11%. And then there's about 1 in 4, 28%, who say it's just that the system is too complex. If you wonder why, you see in any polling data why by about 70 to 25 people say we should be raising taxes on people who make $1 million a year or more, it's because beneath that surface they believe there are people who are not paying their fair share, and they are. They get up every day, they go to work, they do what they're supposed to do, they pay their taxes, they don't get any special breaks, many of them don't even get deductions, and they resent, in fact, that they don't think that fairness permeates the system. Now, you folks who are on the front lines of government, you're a lot closer to it. You all know that local governments get the highest rating, higher than state and higher than the federal government. But this is very important in terms of the debate that we're going to have in 2012. The fact of the matter is that the American people do not demonize government. They actually see government having a role in an array of areas, many of which the mayor touched on in his remarks before I spoke. But this one, there's always a big debate about. And when you look at the data, this is job creation. And people do not think, yes, they believe the private sector is the most important engine of job creation. But on the left side is a question from Allstate on whether or not, in order to develop solutions and address national economic opportunities and challenges, do they believe business should take the lead on its own? Should government and business work together? Or government should take the lead entirely? Now, very few people say government should take the lead entirely. That's that small slice at the bottom. That green slice is 12%. But 60%, that big slice of the pie, say government and business should work together. And only 24% say business should take the lead. And on the right side, its question is asked specifically about the federal government, because you folks know that you're at the local level. Everything happens more at the local level. Everybody believes mayors, governors can have more of an impact. But on the right side, how much do you think the federal government can do to create jobs in the United States? And this is from an Associated Press poll in December of 2011. And over 70% say a great deal, quite a bit, or a moderate amount. Only 29% say very little or nothing at all. And this is kind of interesting here in an environment where we've taken steps that have come under attack. I think you all know the job numbers. We're seeing growth month by month in the private sector jobs. We've created over 2 million jobs now, about 20 months straight of private sector job growth. Another fact that's out there is the number of federal government employees, non-military, is actually at a lower level than it was in Ronald Reagan's last year in office in 1988. So at the same time private sector is coming back, there has been containment on the federal level as well. There's a debate going on, and we hear a lot about it, particularly from the Republican candidates during the debates that they've been having on television during their primary season. And one thing that is absolutely clear is that Americans do not want to go back to letting Wall Street write its own rules again. On the left side of a question from a Gallup poll on whether or not people approve of the legislation that increased government regulation, not Wall Street reform, not Dodd-Frank, increased government regulation, a word that we know gets bandied about in a negative context, of banks and financial institutions, 61% of America approve that legislation. 76% of Democrats, 62% of independents, and 4 out of 10 Republicans. And when the Center for Responsible Lending asked the question just this past summer, do you think the Wall Street reform law should be repealed or should it be allowed to take effect? Because there's been a lot of call for repeal. Every candidate I've heard on the other side has said they're going to repeal it. By 63 to 20, Americans say, don't repeal it. They have a very similar attitude about defunding the EPA. American people in communities like yours understand that having clean air, clean water is something that government has to do. You know, back in the 90s, one of the things that President Clinton pushed through was a law that required companies to tell local fire departments what chemicals they had in their buildings. Americans understand that part of building strong communities is having that information and having those kinds of protections for kids who breathe our air and water. With the recent gains we've seen in the economy, there is an uptick in optimism, both about the economic future of the country and about their personal situation. Now, this doesn't suggest that they think we're on easy street or that we are totally out of the woods yet. But if you look at the data on the left from October of 2011 to December 2011, asked whether people think over the next 10 months the economy overall will improve or worsen. Back in October, it was about a 50-50 split, as you can see, the green bar and the blue bar, 50 and 46. Right next to that, now in December, late December, by 56 to 36, a 20-point spread, people believe conditions over the next 12 months will improve. When you also ask people if they believe the economy is going to get a little better, a lot better, a little worse, a lot worse, close to 60% of people say it will get a little better or a lot better over the next 12 months. And on the right side is data about their own personal finance. Now, on this question, it's a similar question. Do you think your personal situation will improve or worsen over the next 12 months? There's a pretty solid band of 40% when both of these numbers appear a year apart, December 2010 and 11, who say they think they'll stay the same. But where the change has occurred is a year ago, a little more than a year ago, the number of people who thought their personal situation would improve was 30% said improve, 25% said worsen. Now, when you come back in December 2011 in the same sample, 44 to 14 say that they expect their personal situation to improve. I think when you look at the president's policies and how are they viewed going forward, and I said I would do a little bit of politics at the end, and I will, and then I will wrap up. If you ask a forward-looking question here on what impact, what they think President Obama's impact has been in his policies, looking backward first, thinking back over the policies President Obama has pursued during his presidency, would you say the country is worse off significantly, better off significantly, or is it not significantly better off yet, but they're going in the right direction because of the policies President Obama has pursued? And 54%, a majority now, say that things are either significantly better or not significantly better, but moving in the right direction because of the policies that President Obama has pursued. A smaller minority of 38% say the counter-argument that they are significantly worse because of the president's policies. When you take that forward and look at some of the areas that the president has advocated, from his jobs program to the Recovery Act to rescuing Detroit, what's clear is Americans favor investment in infrastructure. In fact, 80% of Americans believe that investments in infrastructure are a good idea, such as bridges, schools, airports, and asked if it's a good idea or a bad idea for the federal government to provide money to state governments so they can avoid layoffs of police, teachers, and firefighters, 65% of Americans say that's a good idea. They see both of these as investments, not just in building and creating an economy that's built to last, but creating communities that are built to last. So while they're mindful of the deficit, while they want that under control, they also understand the need for investments in cities like yours. Same is true, by the way, of alternative energy. Let me come back to that as we have another discussion. The Republican ratings in Congress have taken a hit. The ratings of Congress overall have taken a hit. If you look on the far right, Congress is at the lowest approval rating it's ever been. The fact of the matter is, when you look at the ratings of Democrats in Congress and Republicans in Congress, in April of 2011, Democrats in Congress were at 36% approve and 62% disapprove. Republicans were at 34% approve and almost the same. And now Republicans are down to 21% approve and 75% disapprove. Democrats have only dropped from 36% approve back in the spring to 33%. The toll that's been taken on Congress has come not from a decline in the Democrats' ratings, but in a decline in the Republicans' ratings. And the last 2 points I want to make, and then we'll take questions on as we look ahead to the politics. And I'm taking Gallup data here to use it because it's got the longitudinal data. If you look at where President Obama's approval rating is in the Gallup poll today at 46% approve, 46% disapprove, it's exactly identical to where President Clinton's ratings were in January 12th through 15th, 1996, identical numbers. Now, that's not to say that the election is a foregone conclusion by any stretch. President Clinton won that race by 9 points. We think this is going to be a very tight race. But we believe that the president, based on some of these underlying attitudes, based on the fact that the American people see this as a make-or-break moment for the middle class, they understand that the last thing we should do is go back to letting Wall Street write its own rules again, that we can't ignore things like Detroit and the auto industry, that we need to make investments in our infrastructure going forward, in our schools, in our education system, creating job training programs that link up the skills that we need with the jobs that are vacant in America today. There were a bunch of CEOs at the White House a few weeks ago who told President Obama they can't find people with the skills they need. They've got 1 million vacant jobs sitting there. So while it's going to be a competitive election, some of the dynamics that have changed that we can talk about this or anything else that we presented here is that when you look at what's happened in presidential elections over the last about 12 elections, and in particular the last 8, the average national vote margin between Democrats and Republicans between 1980 and 1992 has shifted significantly. If you look at the 4 elections, one starting in 80 and ending in 1992, Democrats averaged only 42.5% in presidential elections. The Republicans during those same 4 elections averaged 50%. They had a net of +8 on the Democrats. If you look since 1996, the elections have been close and they've been hard fought. But there is a shift there. And the Democrats over those 4 years have averaged 49.7%, and the Republicans in those presidential elections have averaged 46.3%. It's a pretty dramatic shift in the margin. Now, I don't believe that averages and the past performance of the past 4 years determine the outcomes of elections. But in terms of the economic values that this election is going to be fought on, and who is standing up for the middle class and working people who are trying to get there, and who isn't, the policies that will help people advance, who is and who isn't, in terms of some of the demographic shifts that are actually contributing to this shift in the presidential margins, very big increase in the percentage of the national electorate that's African American, big increase in the percentage of the electorate that's Latino, bigger gains happening among younger voters in every election cycle, people who are 18 to 29 years old. I think a lot of the dynamics here suggest not only a close race, but a race that portends well for President Obama going forward. I don't think it's going to be easy. I don't think anybody in our camp thinks it's going to be easy. Jim Messina, the campaign manager, has laid out 5 different maps of pathways for President Obama to get to 270 electoral votes. I think we're going to have a long, hard-fought campaign. What I wanted to share with you here today are some of the attitudes that are shaping the debate that we're having. I don't think any of these attitudes are fleeting or are going to shift in the near term because of the nature of our economy. And I think they will shape and determine the outcome of the election at the end of this year in 2012. Thank you very much.
We'll take a few questions. Mayor?
A fellow Angelino, Micheál O'Leary, Mayor of Culver City, California. Thank you, President Villaraigosa, great conference. It's my first, a little nervous, very intimidating group. But a question to the pollster. Obviously, your numbers are saying the same thing that the public, that we are hearing from is saying. The same message that we're sending to our federal and our state legislators, and they're obviously not listening. And that's extremely frustrating when we're tasked with fixing our own local budgets, and then the state government will walk in and say, oh, you have a pot of money, we'll just take some of that too, and put us back in the same position we were. The frustration continues for us. I was wondering of your opinion about what if there's too much confidence by our legislators in Republicans, Democrats, that's our side, that's your side, we only have to worry about the little bit in the middle. What if there was a social media movement urging people to remove themselves from their current party, to decline to state, sending a message that we want compromise, something similar to what FDR got in his first 100 days. Send a message. It might remove 20% of the Republicans from the Republican Party, 20% of the Democrats from the Democratic Party. Would that affect the decisions of both sides, that compromise is being asked for by the people? Act now.
Yeah. Well, look, it's a question and an idea I had not heard of before. I mean, all the data indicates that more people, everybody heard the question, I assume, with the microphone, right? Okay. You know, look, the trend has been that more people, what we call independents, what you call decline to identify, the trend has been that number has gone up. The number of people who identify as Republicans and Democrats has gone down, although it splits generally now in a presidential electorate and even in a congressional electorate close to a third, and a third. I think one of the challenges for that to happen is that in a world where our politics are polarized, people do want to identify with one party or the other. They do want their philosophy aligned with one or the other. We're not having some close calls out there. We're having some big debates on whether or not, you know, Wall Street should be regulated with a common sense set of rules or not. We're having a big debate about whether this country should invest in bridges, roads, and schools or not. We're having a big debate about whether or not we invest and spark research in clean energy or not. And the record, by the way, on the last one is paying big dividends. I don't know how many of you in this room know this, but for the first time since 1949, we are a net exporter of barrels of oil. First time since Harry Truman was president. And our dependence on foreign oil is under 50% for the first time since 1997 because of investments in renewables. So I think while you're having that kind of debate, it's going to be very hard in this moment to galvanize the people to suddenly walk away and go to a middle position when many of them are seeing some pretty stark differences. I think you need an election result to change that, and you know, presumably we're going to have a pretty clear indication as we go forward in 2012 and forward in the coming elections. Do you want me to just?
Yeah, you can go.
Yes, sir, and then I'll get around.
And then if you could make the questions as short as possible.
Right. Hi, I'm Green Bay Mayor Jim Schmidt. Comment first. You mentioned 55% of the people, their attitude is that the kids won't have a better life than they did. And I'm wondering if you defined a better life. And my comment is because I think kids today, one thing's different than us. So these are more humanitarian. I mean, I got 2 kids in college. One's in an orphanage in Africa. The other one, Doctors Without Borders. And have you defined a better life? Secondly, I'd like your comments more on, I think we've hit this panic mode in America, and everybody's about jobs, jobs, and where's the focus on education? We talked about that this morning with Secretary Duncan, and are people overreacting right now to the economy and they're not focused on education? I'd like your comment on that.
No, thank you. I think it's a great question. You know, the question's a historical one that Gallup is asked the same way. So, you know, will they have a better life than you did at a comparable age? And the answer was unlikely, by the way. It wasn't definitive. So the room there was, it's not like they're consumed with pessimism, but there are doubts about whether or not it's likely, whereas Americans had always, a majority always believed that the next generation would do better. But we invested in the next generation. So when you talk about education, and when you talk about that, I think that's going to be a central issue, actually, in this campaign. I think one of the disputes we've had is how much money do we invest in education, the nature of reform. I think Secretary Duncan and the administration and President Obama, in terms of race to the top, has actually struck a chord that's resonating, where people are saying, yeah, let's put in some intelligent, you know, and more common sense standards for evaluation and advancement. So I think this will be a fundamental discussion, because the American people understand that education is linked to our economy. So when you say they're so consumed with the economy that they're not thinking about education, I think it's fair to say that the economy and jobs, and because of some of the instability that's occurred, is their, you know, most salient concern. But they understand that things like education, infrastructure, research and development, energy investments in renewables, so that we're not dependent on foreign oil, are critical. And I suspect that we'll have that kind of holistic debate as we go through this campaign. Anybody from another side of the room? Yes, ma'am.
What I didn't hear in some of your presentation are the issues that really affect mayors who have large disproportionate numbers of poverty. And what are the issues in some of your strategy and analysis going forward? Because if Congress and the White House are going to ever get to the bottom of addressing poverty, and particularly women, you know, who make up 72 million of the workforce, and the whole pay scale inequity, why aren't there any questions being driven on that in order to be able to help shape, you know, policies both in the House and the Senate, and to have those issues driven in the next election?
When you say any questions being shaped by that, you mean in the polling data
Yes.
I presented?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Because I'm a political pollster, what I thought I would do is, you know, what people tend to focus on is what's really shaping the swing attitudes, how does this impact the politics? So I focused on those questions that are the ones that, with what we call swing voters, are the most salient. You know, in terms of the issue that affects you as mayors, and poverty, and employment, I don't think anybody believes that. I mean, people know the numbers. You know, it's interesting that, you know, we get accused of class warfare on our side of the equation, and then we hear people in the debates talking about, you know, a food stamp society or an entitlement society. I mean, this country, I think, still believes that we have a responsibility to each other. I think they believe that we have to start with education. I think they understand that the only way out of poverty for many people who are in poverty or who have fallen or slid back into it as a result of this is either through better education, better job training, linking up community colleges with businesses, which has probably happened in many of your cities, so that they develop a curriculum and training programs that actually lead to jobs. That's probably the central issue in terms of how you deal with this, the issue of poverty and the numbers that we see today on a long-term basis. And I think it comes back to this gentleman's question. I think education and job training and skills are going to become a central question in this debate going forward. Thank you.
Let's give a big hand to Joel for your analysis and advice. With the plenary session, the plenary session is adjourned, and mayors, those of you who are going to the White House should board the buses outside of the hotel, and please remember to bring your photo ID. if you want to get in. I think, what time are we meeting, Tom? The bus will be... Yeah, bus will leave at 4:05. Give these guys the chance to go to the restroom. Buses will leave at 4:05.